Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. So great to see you all shiny and bright this morning. We're going to get started. Please feel free to continue to enjoy your breakfast. We have plenty of it out there and welcome you to eat it throughout this first presentation. Getting us started today, we have Dr. Teresa Pardo, and I'd like to say a few words about her. Teresa Pardo serves as director of the Center for Technology and Government at the University at Albany, State University of New York, where she also holds research professor appointments in public administration and policy and informatics. Under her leadership, the center works closely with government, civil society, and industry teams in the U.S. and around the world to carry out applied research and problem-solving projects focused on the intersections of policy, management, and technology in the governmental context. Center work has broken ground in information and knowledge sharing, open government and open data, e-government, social media policy, and mobile technologies and human services delivery. For these reasons, we've asked CTG to facilitate our sessions today, and as our presenters go through this morning, you'll get more of a context of what our intentions are. So without further ado, Dr. Teresa Pardo.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me with this down? Right? No, not too much. Better? Louder? So pretend you're my kids? Okay, got it. Good morning. I'm really thrilled to be here to share with you today some ideas, some perspectives on the important topic of the application of, let me just get us, of data to these important public problems. Really excited about what's happening here today. I'm very honored to be asked to be part of the process of creating a new way to talk about the collective impact of the the Cradle to Career Alliance. The presentations we heard yesterday were very, very exciting. The conversations that we heard in the work groups and the breakout groups tell us that the state is in good shape. It's in good hands. But there's a lot of work to be done yet. So there's a lot of passion, but there's also a lot of need. And so this presentation that I'm going to make is just, it's 9 o'clock, it's Friday morning. So I'm not going to get too deep into the specifics of selected data systems. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we see at CTG as the data context, and really, most importantly, the changing data context within which the work that you're doing is occurring. And I tell this story through this set of slides as a way to kind of give you a sense that there are many, many opportunities, many potential partners in the larger environment who are anxious, as you are, to create new ways to think about and use data and apply those new ways to the questions that matter to you. Right? So there's communities all over the world, across the sectors, across the disciplines, that are wrestling with these questions. And so I want to tell you a little bit about that as a way to get us started for the day. And I am going to try to watch my clock because I know we're a bit behind schedule. Where's Vanessa? Good. So how long? 20 minutes? 15? Awesome. Like I'm going to listen. So I have my phone, right? So I'll try to watch. I'll keep us on just about till 10 after. So I just want to tell you very briefly about the Center for Technology and Government. Vanessa gave you a little bit of an overview, but we were very specifically created, I think this is an important story to tell, to focus on the state of New York. So for a very long time, the state of New York has been paying attention in a unique way to the questions about innovation and how can we ensure that technology innovation and innovations in the way we use information drive the state forward. And so 20 years ago, we were on the cutting edge with respect to creating this kind of an entity. technology. And I think, again, here in this room, with this initiative, we are also on the cutting edge. How is the state thinking in a collective way about a critical set of questions? And so the center was created with this idea in mind, that we need to understand the interactions between management, policy, and technology. And that's a really hard thing to do. And it's really hard because they're constantly changing. And so in your programs, I'm sure you're very, very familiar with the idea that there is no status quo, right? Everything is dynamic, constantly changing. The problems that kids are facing, the tools and techniques we have available to support them, to make decisions, it's a very complex environment. And so what we try to do in our work, and I think what you're trying to do in your work, is to figure out a way to navigate through that space to get clarity against the critical questions that you're trying to answer. And so our focus is at the intersection of these policy management and technology issues, and our commitment is to partnership models, very much like the commitment that you have here. There we go. So again, the work that we do, and I raise this question and spend a little bit of time on it, or I raise this model and spend a little time on it, because I think it's really very, very important for people in the room to know that the research community, the university community, is very, very committed to these kind of practice partnerships. So I want to ask a quick question. How many people in the room are work in civil society organizations, nonprofits who are actually delivering programs and services? School districts? University, college, faculty, staff? Okay, so there you are, right? Okay. Who else? Who did I not catch? SUNY people, of course. City government? So it's quite an eclectic, quite a good mix of folks who are here trying to come together to partner on these questions. So CTG's worked as Vanessa said, again, with lots of partners around the world. And again, I put this out here to tell you that the framework for the couple of stories I'm going to tell you is very broad. We have a set of questions that you're facing here, that you're exploring in terms of coming up with a way to tell an integrated story that is being pursued all over the world. People are trying to understand new ways to use data to tell those collective stories. And so I think there's lots of opportunity for you to learn from others. This is my favorite slide ever. I've been using it since 1996. Right? Does it still work? Right? It still works. Unfortunately, it still works. I could talk for hours and hours and hours, as I imagine any of you could in this room, about why this is the case. And so what we're here to do, at least in my 45 minutes, is to talk a little bit about how the world is thinking about this problem and how can you as a community draw on some of the things that are happening in the world around you that are focused on changing this reality. Part of the reason that we're here is because there's lots of new things happening in the world. There's new technologies that are allowing us to think in new ways about data. We're collecting more data. We're managing it and organizing it in new ways. We're making it more easily available, in theory, to use, to application, to really important problems. And so this is creating a lot of excitement in this room. Again, Friday morning, 9 o'clock. The week before, last week in June, here we are trying to think about data and how can we leverage data in new ways to support an argument, I think, that you're seeking to make with respect to the impact of the Alliance. So how do we think about this excitement? Right? We have to be real careful about this excitement, even though we see it every day, changing the way people's lives are lived. This is a quick story from New Jersey where we have a complete new understanding about emergency room visits. And in fact, this gentleman used data to uncover the fact that actually house calls are cheaper than for a particular population than their regular visits to an emergency room. So now in this particular community, they have services that actually do house calls, and it's cheaper than emergency room visits. Right? Go figure. How counterintuitive is that, right? But the data showed it would make sense to provide such a service. Those of you who live around New York City, hopefully you've seen this or you've taken an opportunity to look at the NYC 311 data that tells you about life in your city. you begin to understand in a new way where are the calls for services coming into the New York City government, and how is New York City government reorganizing the way it delivers services based on now what it knows about cycles, the cycles of service requests, the issues associated with particular neighborhoods at particular times of day, right? So changing the way service is delivered to respond to, in fact, patterns in the way people live their lives. Health Data New York, another example of a really wonderful resource that's being created, made available. We talk with these folks all the time, and they say to us, Teresa, can you help us understand what it is that people want? Right? We have thousands of data sets, thousands and thousands of data sets. Which ones should we make available? Which sets matter more to which people? And in what way can we make them available to meet their need? So at least at the state level, I'm sure at the city level, that we have data professionals who are trying to answer the question, what should I post to the web? What should I invest my time in making sure the data has the quality that is needed to answer a particular set of questions or to serve the needs of a particular audience? So there are new kinds of professionals out there who are trying to meet the demands that folks have for data. So let's help them by giving them understanding of those demands. What is it that the community needs? So data is the new oil. Have folks seen this? Data is the new oil. I don't know if I agree with it, but it's very powerful, right? So you just can't look underneath it, right? Data is a really important thing. It's changing a lot of our organizations. It's changing the way we interact with each other, the kinds of questions that are possible. It's also changing the job market, right? Have you seen this? Sexiest job in the 21st century, data science. Right? Problem with the sexiest job in the 21st century is we don't have anybody to take those jobs, right? So in the work that you're doing, the work that we're doing, we have to pay attention to the fact that we're asking for jobs to be done where in many, many cases we don't have the individuals yet with much of the skill that's needed to carry out that job. And so part of your warrant, I would say, part of the contribution that you can make to the communities that you work with is to help them understand what is it that we need in terms of the skill sets to do the job within the context of the alliance partners. We want to ask X kinds of questions. So what are the skills that are needed to answer those questions? How can academic programs, career workforce development programs ensure that they're producing the kind of skill sets that are necessary? What we're also seeing across the world is that the excitement and the investments being made in the use of data is uncovering lots of gaps in the infrastructures that are necessary to support such use. So what are those gaps is a very important question at every level, at the national level, at the state level, the city level, at the community level, at the alliance level. Where are those gaps, and how can we work together to fill those gaps in the components of the infrastructure that are necessary to make sure that you have the data that you need, to make sure that you have the ability to answer or to identify the best questions. So I was at an event a couple weeks ago at the New York Academy of Sciences. The room was filled with leading statisticians and lawyers focused on privacy and confidentiality, economists. And we spent the whole day talking about new statistical models and new conceptual frameworks. But ultimately, the question that everybody felt was the most critical one, or the skill that was the most critical and where we had tremendous gaps, is figuring out what is the right question. So not applying statistical tools and techniques to answer the question, but making sure we have the right question. So what are the skills there that are needed to make sure that the questions as identified are in fact the ones that will, if answered, get us the most value? And so creating these kinds of capabilities is quite critical across the board. So let me give a good an example of one kind of initiative that highlighted some pretty basic gaps in capability. So some of you may be aware of the U.S. Open Government Directive. Was put out in 2009 by President Obama. It called for a new commitment to transparency, accountability, and collaboration. Drove, if you will, the open data movement. We were asked to work with the White House Open Government Working Group to help them answer a couple of questions that were stymieing their efforts. And what they were trying to figure out is what thing matters more? What matters more? If we do A versus B, will we get more value? And so there were, as they discovered at that time, very few, if any, tools to help them answer questions about what thing matters more. And so I think it's important to know it, even regardless of the level, these basic questions about how do I know if A matters more than B, and then how do I get the data to answer those questions. These are very, very, if you will, basic requirements that have very complicated solutions. What we also learned in that process, and I think it's very important to put on the table here, is that for most government agencies around the world who are trying to respond to the kinds of directives that were put forward by President Obama, the government officials in those agencies are actually unfamiliar with the expectations that are placed upon them. Their job is to collect data, manage it, and make it available to support transactions. Right. So what we have now is an entirely new set of expectations for which these government officials in general are unfamiliar. They're not unwilling. Right? In my experience, they're quite willing. The question is, how do we help them become more familiar? And part of the answer to that question is in making clear what it is we want and need, right? And be relatively clear among the demand side, if you will. What are our requirements? What is the information that we need to answer the kinds of questions that we have? In our work, what we have discovered is that information sharing at the foundation of much of the work that you're doing is an extremely complex process. I heard yesterday, right, we're talking at the problem-solving level, at the individual effort level. It's relatively easy to share information, to get the information that we need to answer a particular question or solve a particular problem. But at a system level, at an enterprise level, it's an extremely complex problem. Extremely complex for all kinds of reasons. Every time you cross a border, a boundary, a policy domain, a professional domain, every single one of these differences increases the complexity of an information sharing process. And when we go into the kinds of work that you're doing, I have to recognize that what we're doing is we're entering into an innovation space. We're entering into a space where the expectations of the individuals we're engaging with are unfamiliar, where it's an information sharing environment, which is a very, very complex space, and it's a difficult thing to do. So, good for you, right? Sure, you're sort of storming in. It's important to know the context within which you're operating. And I'm going to just jump along here so I can make sure we get done on time. A lot of the work that we do with government agencies also allows us to understand that there are individuals and institutional mechanisms that cause tension in this data sharing environment. And they come for a lot of these different reasons. Concerns about data quality. I can't show it to you till it's perfect. I don't need it to be perfect. Well, what do you need? I need it to be fit for use for the question I'm asking. Well, what's the question you're asking? So these are the kinds of interaction spaces that we have to become familiar with. We have to understand are going to be necessary in order to get us the data that we need to answer the questions we have. We worked a number of years ago with the Bureau of Shelter Services way back in the late 90s when they were one of the first organizations that said, we have a history of counting hots and cots, as we call them, right? Hots and cots. But we want to understand what is the impact of the service delivery programs on the likelihood that any individual will ever become permanently independent. We thought, oh, cool. They said, great, so we want to look at our service data so we can answer that question. We said, great. We started looking around. Guess what? No service data. They didn't actually collect the data that they needed, right? They had hots and cots because it was a billing model. So we said, okay, let's work together to begin to understand how to collect service data so that you can ultimately evaluate the impact of those services on your clients. It took us 18 months to begin to develop a definition that they all agreed on of the word service. What's a service? Depends on the shelter, depends on the population, depends on Right? This is a complex process of developing coherence among a community around a single phrase, a single term. And so what we recognize through that process, and I'm sure many of you recognize as well, this is a very prolonged effort. It takes time, energy, effort, and willingness. So passion and commitment as well as capability are quite critical. What we're seeing across the world are programs like this. Education informatics, bioinformatics, social work informatics, policy informatics. These are entirely new specialties that are being stood up at our universities as well as in our professional communities to create the capability to go after these kinds of questions, these kinds of problems, helping create new capability that intervenes here, that makes it possible for policy professionals to have access to data professionals who are knowledgeable in their respective policy fields so that we can create the kind of new understanding that we all believe is possible. So real quickly, the other kinds of things that are happening around the world, data governance. Ever hear the phrase data governance? Whole new kinds of institutional mechanisms across the private sector, the public sector, the nonprofit sector, focused on data and governance of that data, making decisions about it. Who gets access to it? At what level? Have we protected privacy? May we release it? These are very, very critical capabilities that you as data consumers need to know are becoming increasingly available. It should become increasingly easy for you to get at the decision makers related to the data that you want to use. All kinds of infrastructures being created to pay attention to data issues. New kinds of executives, chief data officers, whose responsibility it is to think about data issues and pay attention to data consumers. Many of you in this room are data consumers, and you need to know about these people, and you need to begin to understand how you can leverage their expertise and responsibility. In New York State, one of the things that the chief data officer did was create an open data handbook. That open data handbook tells every single state agency and local government, if they choose to abide by the same kind of policies, how to capture, how to organize, how to manage the data, how to think about privacy and confidentiality issues, how to release data. So ultimately now we have a standard by which data is considered as an asset and made available to users. 2 more slides. One of the other things that's happening, and I think this is a really important part of the mix, is the kind of initiative that's been run by Rockefeller Institute of Government, which is bringing together researchers and policymakers to figure out how to provide access to secure data, new models for providing users with access to data that might have privacy issues associated with that use. So we have to come up with new kind of tools and techniques and policies and procedures to give individuals access to this data so that they can use it. But what we need in these mixes is, again, the demand side. I need access to data X, Y, and Z, and if it's not easily done, we need to think about new ways of making that data available to consumers. So I come to this last slide because I think in this new, the changing data context, the Cradle to Career Alliance is a new kind of demand side actor in this ecosystem, in the data ecosystem. May be able to go to these data executives, to these data organizations, and be able to say, this is what we need, this is why we need it, so work with us. Okay, so reach out, understand that these partners are out there. They're looking, I've said to Andrew Nicklin, who's the governor's open data executive, he said to me many times, Teresa, help me figure out who is looking for data so I can respond to their need, right? My job is to respond to the needs of New Yorkers with respect to data. Help me figure out who they are and what they need. And so this is part of my purpose here, is to tell you that you are demand side. Right? There's lots of assets out there. I invite you to work with us and others to try and change the equation here and equal out so that the information you need is freely, well, yes, almost freely available for your use. So thank you very much.